October 3, 1943. 06:15 hours. The Volturno River, southern Italy, 12 kilometers inland from the Tyrrhenian coast. A German defensive line occupies the north bank. The position consists of foxholes, machine gun nests, and field fortifications dug into rocky soil and concealed by scrub vegetation. Approximately 120 men from the 15th Panzergrenadier Division hold this sector. The river is 30 meters wide at this point. Water level is low following weeks without rain. The current is visible but slow. The south bank rises slightly higher than the north, a natural advantage for attackers observing German positions. Morning fog clings to the water but is beginning to lift. Across the river, Allied forces are present. British infantry from the 56th Division. They have been moving into position since before dawn. The sounds of their preparation, equipment shifting, boots on stone, whispered commands carried across the water until 20 minutes ago. Now, silence. Unteroffizier Hans Vogel lies in a foxhole 3 meters from the riverbank. His MG-42 machine gun is mounted on its bipod, angled to cover the crossing point directly ahead. Belt-fed ammunition is ready. The weapon is clean and functional. Vogel's hands rest near the grips. He does not move. He watches the opposite bank and waits for the signal to fire. The signal will be a whistle blast from his section commander, positioned 15 meters to his right. The whistle will sound when the British begin crossing. It has not sounded. Vogel waits. The Volturno River marked the German defensive line following their withdrawal from Naples. The line extended across the Italian peninsula, anchored on terrain features that favored defense. The 15th Panzergrenadier Division had occupied positions along this sector for 8 days, preparing for an inevitable Allied assault. Vogel's section consisted of 12 men, 1 MG-42 crew, 1 mortar team, and 8 riflemen. They had been rotated to this position 2 days earlier. The foxholes had been dug by previous occupants and required only minor improvement. Fields of fire were clear. Ammunition and rations were adequate. Communications with company headquarters, located 400 meters behind the line, were maintained by runner. Intelligence assessments indicated that Allied forces were concentrating opposite this sector. Reconnaissance patrols had observed movement and supply buildup. Artillery registration fires had targeted German positions sporadically, suggesting preparation for a major crossing attempt. The timing was uncertain but imminent. British doctrine for river assault operations was known to German commanders. Artillery preparation would precede the crossing. Smoke would obscure observation. Infantry would cross in assault boats or on footbridges constructed by engineers. The initial wave would establish a bridgehead. Follow-on forces would exploit. The sector held by Vogel's section was considered likely for an assault. The river was narrower here than at adjacent points. The south bank provided observation and covered approaches for attacking forces. The terrain beyond the north bank offered routes toward German rear areas. If the British intended to cross in strength, this location made tactical sense. German defensive plans were simple. Allow the assault to begin. Engage with maximum firepower once targets were exposed on the water. Inflict casualties sufficient to halt or disrupt the crossing. Request artillery support if the assault persisted. Hold the line until relieved or ordered to withdraw. Vogel had participated in defensive operations in Russia and Sicily. He understood the sequence. The British would come. He would fire. The outcome would depend on numbers, timing, and support. His role was mechanical: operate the weapon, maintain fire discipline, conserve ammunition until targets appeared. At 05:45 hours, German artillery fired harassing fires across the river, targeting suspected British assembly areas. The barrage lasted 10 minutes. After it ceased, silence returned. Vogel waited for British artillery to respond. None came. The quiet continued. German training emphasized defensive firepower. The MG-42 was the centerpiece of infantry defense. Its rate of fire, up to 1,200 rounds per minute, could sweep areas and suppress movement. Doctrine positioned machine guns to create interlocking fields of fire, ensuring no dead space existed where attackers could advance without exposure. Vogel had trained on the MG-42 for 2 years. He knew its characteristics: the sound, the recoil, the barrel heating, the need for barrel changes after sustained fire. He knew how to lead moving targets, how to adjust for range, how to fire in short bursts to conserve ammunition and maintain accuracy. The weapon was reliable when properly maintained. Vogel maintained his weapon properly. The tactical situation favored the defense. Attackers crossing water were vulnerable, slow-moving, concentrated, difficult to conceal. Defensive fire delivered at the moment of maximum exposure could devastate an assault before it reached the far bank. The Germans had prepared for this. Every machine gun, every rifle, every mortar was positioned to deliver fire onto the river. Standard procedure dictated that fire would begin on command. Premature engagement would reveal positions and allow enemy artillery to target them before the main assault began. Discipline required waiting until the optimal moment, when assault boats were midstream, when retreat was impossible, when casualties would have maximum effect. Vogel had been briefed the previous evening. His section commander, Feldwebel Ernst Klein, had reviewed the fire plan. Vogel's MG-42 was designated the primary weapon for the sector. His field of fire covered a 40-meter frontage. He would engage targets as they appeared, prioritizing boats and concentrations of personnel. He would fire until the assault was repelled, until he ran out of ammunition, or until ordered to cease. The morning had progressed with mounting tension. The fog had concealed movement on the south bank but also prevented observation. As visibility improved, Vogel scanned the opposite shore through the MG-42 sights. He saw vegetation, rocks, the river's edge. No movement, no targets. At 0600 hours, Klein had moved along the line, speaking briefly with each position. He reminded them to hold fire until the signal. He confirmed ammunition quantities. He returned to his position. The line waited. At 0610 hours, a sound carried across the water, metal scraping on stone, then silence again. Vogel shifted slightly, ensuring his position allowed maximum traverse. His finger rested near the trigger. He breathed slowly, controlling his heart rate. The wait continued. 0620 hours. The fog has cleared almost completely. Visibility across the river is unobstructed. Vogel can see the south bank in detail. Rocks, bushes, the slope rising beyond, no movement, no assault boats, no engineers, no infantry. The British are not crossing. They are present. Vogel knows this from the sounds heard earlier, from intelligence reports, from the logical conclusion that forces positioned for an assault do not simply disappear. But they are not crossing. Klein does not blow his whistle. The signal to fire does not come. The line remains silent. The river flows undisturbed. Vogel's hands do not move. The MG-42 remains aimed at the water. His field of fire is empty. There is nothing to shoot. The procedure is clear: fire on command at visible targets. No command has been given. No targets exist. Minutes pass. 0625. 0630. The morning brightens. The sun rises higher. The river reflects light. Still no movement across the water. Still no whistle blast. Still no order. Vogel does not relax his grip. He does not shift his position. He continues to observe through the sights. The British might appear at any moment. The assault might begin without warning. He waits. The sound he is waiting for, the whistle, does not come. The sound he expects to follow, the MG-42 firing, the impact of rounds on water and metal and flesh, does not occur. The silence persists. Nothing happens. 0635 hours. Vogel glances briefly to his right toward Klein's position. Klein is visible, observing the river with binoculars. Klein does not signal. He watches and waits as Vogel does. The front line waits for a sound that does not come. The British assault does not materialize. The river remains empty. The defensive line remains tense, prepared, and increasingly uncertain. Time stretches without resolution. At 0645 hours, a runner arrives from company headquarters. He moves quickly along the trench system connecting the positions. He stops at Klein's foxhole and speaks briefly. Klein acknowledges. The runner continues east to the next section. Klein does not relay information to his men. They continue to wait. Vogel's muscles ache from sustained readiness. He adjusts his position slightly to relieve pressure on his knees. He does not take his eyes from the river. The weapon remains aimed. The ammunition belt remains ready, but no targets appear. At 07:00 hours, German artillery fires another harassing mission across the river. 6 rounds land in dispersed patterns on the south bank. The explosions are distant. No secondary detonations suggest ammunition stores were hit. No screams suggest casualties. The artillery ceases. Silence returns. The absence of a British assault creates questions that have no answers. Vogel does not know why the attack has not occurred. He does not know if it has been postponed, cancelled, or redirected to another sector. He does not know if British forces are still present across the river or have withdrawn during the night. He has no information beyond what he can observe, an empty river and a silent opposite bank. Klein moves along the line at 07:15 hours. He stops at Vogel's position and speaks quietly. He instructs Vogel to maintain readiness. The assault may still occur. Intelligence has not reported a British withdrawal. The situation is unchanged except for the passage of time. Klein returns to his position. The waiting continues. Vogel's awareness sharpens and dulls in cycles. Periods of acute attention alternate with fatigue-induced lapses. He forces concentration. He scans the river methodically, left to right, near to far, then back. Nothing changes. The water flows. The banks remain still. At 08:00 hours, the sun has fully risen. The morning is clear and cool. Visibility is excellent. If the British intended to cross under cover of darkness or fog, that opportunity has passed. A daylight assault would be costly. Perhaps this explains the delay. Perhaps they are waiting for evening. Vogel does not know. He waits. The British assault did not occur because it had been cancelled 12 hours earlier. On the evening of October 2, Allied commanders received updated intelligence regarding German defensive strength along the Volturno. The assessment indicated that German forces were better positioned and more numerous than previously estimated. Casualties from a frontal assault would be unacceptably high. The decision was made to redirect the main effort to a different sector 3 kilometers east, where terrain and German dispositions were more favorable. The assault opposite Vogel's position was reduced to a diversionary demonstration, limited activity designed to fix German forces in place while the actual crossing occurred elsewhere. British units positioned across from Vogel's section were instructed to simulate preparation for an assault, movement, equipment noise, visible activity, but not to execute the crossing. The intent was to keep German forces alert and engaged in this sector, preventing them from reinforcing the actual crossing point. The deception succeeded partially. German forces, including Vogel's section, prepared for an assault that was never intended to occur. They waited for an attack that existed only as a diversion. The British across the river waited for orders to cross that would not be given. This information was not available to Vogel or Klein. They operated with the understanding that an assault was imminent based on observed British activity and intelligence reports. Those reports were accurate regarding British presence, but incorrect regarding intent. The distinction was unknowable from a foxhole on the north bank of the Volturno. Klein received fragmentary information through the company runner at 06:45 hours. The message stated only that no assault had been detected in the sector and that units should maintain defensive readiness. No explanation was provided. Klein interpreted this as confirmation that the assault was delayed, not cancelled. He continued to prepare for an attack. At 09:30 hours, German observers 3 kilometers east reported a major British assault crossing the Volturno. Heavy fighting developed in that sector. Artillery and reserves were redirected to counter the penetration. Vogel's sector remained quiet. The diversion had achieved its purpose. The reason the British did not cross opposite Vogel's position was tactical calculation made at levels far above his awareness. The decision saved British casualties and achieved operational surprise elsewhere. It also meant that German forces in Vogel's sector waited prepared for violence that never came. At 10:00 hours, Klein received new orders via runner. The section was to maintain positions but reduce immediate readiness. Half the men could stand down for rest while half remained on watch. The British assault in the adjacent sector was developing. Vogel's sector was not threatened. Vogel remained at his weapon for another hour before being rotated off watch. He moved back to a covered position 15 meters behind the line. He ate a small meal of bread and tinned meat. He drank water from his canteen. He did not speak to the other men. They sat in small groups, resting but alert. The machine gun position was taken over by another soldier from the section. The weapon remained in place, aimed at the river. The ammunition remained ready. The defensive posture did not change fundamentally, only the personnel maintaining it. By midday, the sound of fighting from the adjacent sector was audible. Artillery, small arms fire, the distant rumble of explosions. Battle was significant. Vogel's sector remained static. No British forces appeared. The river continued to flow undisturbed. At 14:00 hours, orders arrived for the section to prepare to withdraw. German forces in the adjacent sector were being pushed back by the British assault. The defensive line along the Volturno was being adjusted. Vogel's section would displace to a secondary position 2 kilometers north to avoid being flanked. The withdrawal began at 15:00 hours. The men packed their equipment methodically. The MG-42 was dismounted and carried in sections. Ammunition that could not be carried was buried. Foxholes were not destroyed. They might be reoccupied if the situation changed. The section moved north along prepared routes. They passed through defensive positions manned by other units. By 17:00 hours, they had reached the secondary line and began establishing new positions. The process was routine. Dig in, establish fields of fire, prepare for engagement. Vogel set up his MG-42 in a new position overlooking different terrain. The weapon functioned as it had before. The routine was unchanged. The previous position along the Volturno, where he had waited for 5 hours for an assault that never came, was now behind him. The war continued. No German report documented the non-event at Vogel's position on October 3, 1943. Daily situation reports noted that no enemy activity occurred in the sector. The absence of an assault did not merit detailed explanation or analysis. Defensive lines were maintained. No casualties occurred. No ground was lost or gained. The sector was quiet. British operational reports noted that diversionary demonstrations were conducted along multiple points of the Volturno to support the main crossing effort. The specific locations and details of these demonstrations were mentioned only in general terms. The intent was achieved. German forces were dispersed and unable to concentrate against the actual assault. Vogel's experience, waiting through the morning with weapon ready for an enemy that did not appear, was shared by dozens of other German soldiers along the line. None filed reports. None were interviewed. The experience was common enough in defensive warfare, anticipation of combat followed by inaction. It generated no documentation. Klein's section records for October 3 note the section's position, strength, and activities in minimal detail. The entry states that the section occupied defensive positions along the Volturno from 06:00 to 15:00 hours, then withdrew to secondary positions. No engagement occurred. Ammunition expenditure, 0. The decision made by Allied commanders on October 2 to cancel the assault opposite Vogel's sector saved British lives that would have been lost in the crossing. That calculation was recorded in planning documents but not in operational summaries. The lives saved were hypothetical, casualties that did not occur because an action was not taken. Vogel did not know that the assault he prepared for was never intended to occur. He believed he had waited for an attack that was delayed or redirected. The distinction was academic. He had performed his function, maintained readiness, operated his weapon system, followed orders. That the weapon was not fired did not reflect on his competence or discipline. The front line that waited for a sound that never came, the whistle blast signaling the opening of fire, existed for 5 hours and then dissolved. The moment left no mark beyond the experience of those present, and that experience was unremarkable enough to be forgotten. Hans Vogel continued serving with the 15th Panzergrenadier Division through the Italian campaign. He participated in defensive operations at Cassino in early 1944 and was wounded by artillery fragments in March. He recovered and returned to duty in June. He was transferred to the Western Front in August 1944 and fought in France and Germany until captured by American forces in April 1945. He was released from prisoner of war status in 1946 and returned to his family home near Stuttgart. He worked as a machinist in a textile factory. He married in 1948 and had 2 children. He spoke infrequently about his military service. When asked, he described his time in Italy as difficult but not exceptional. In 1972, Vogel was contacted by a researcher compiling unit histories for German veterans organizations. The researcher asked about specific engagements during the Italian campaign. Vogel mentioned Cassino and several other battles. He did not mention the morning of October 3, 1943, along the Volturno. The researcher did not ask about it. The interview lasted 30 minutes and covered 2 years of service. Individual quiet days were not discussed. Vogel died in 1989 at age 68. His military records, archived in German federal repositories, contain standard documentation: service dates, units, promotions, wounds, decorations. No detail captures the morning he spent waiting at a machine gun for a target that never appeared. Ernst Klein survived the war and emigrated to Argentina in 1950. He worked in agricultural management. He maintained minimal contact with former comrades. He died in 1977. No memoirs or interviews from him exist in accessible archives. The 15th Panzergrenadier Division's historical records note the fighting along the Volturno in early October 1943. The division withdrew from the river line on October 4 following Allied breakthroughs in adjacent sectors. The withdrawal was conducted in good order. Losses were moderate. The division remained combat effective. The British 56th Division's history documents the successful crossing of the Volturno on October 3. The operation achieved its objectives. Casualties were within acceptable limits. The diversionary efforts along other sectors were noted as contributing to the success. A machine gun aimed at a river, an empty field of fire, a whistle that did not sound, 5 hours of waiting that produced nothing but the passage of time, a soldier who positioned himself to deliver violence and instead delivered nothing. The British did not cross because the plan changed. The assault was redirected. The demonstration succeeded by appearing to threaten what it never intended to execute. German forces waited prepared for an event that existed only as deception. Hans Vogel's hands on the MG-42 grips, his eyes scanning the water, his readiness maintained through hours of anticipation. The weapon ready, the ammunition ready, the target absent, the moment extending without resolution. At 15:00 hours, the position was abandoned. The foxhole remained. The field of fire remained. The river continued to flow. The war moved elsewhere. What had been a front line became empty ground. The sound that never came, the whistle blast, exists now only as absence. The engagement that did not occur left no trace except in the negative space of records that note no activity, no casualties, no ammunition expended. The front line waited and then dissolved. No battle was fought. No ground changed hands. No lives were lost in that sector on that morning. The defensive line held because it was not tested. The assault did not occur because it was never intended. The deception succeeded. The silence persisted. Vogel withdrew with his weapon and his section and continued his service. The morning at the Volturno became one day among hundreds, distinguished only by its lack of distinction. He waited for a sound. The sound did not come. He moved on. The river flows unchanged. The banks are quiet. The morning of October 3, 1943, passed into history as a day when nothing happened. The front line that waited exists only in the fact that it waited, and then it ceased to exist. The silence was complete.